I'm Claire, 31, female. I live in a small but cozy apartment in the heart of the city, a place filled with books and the quiet hum of my laptop. For a living, I shape words for others, working as a senior speechwriter at a prestigious communications firm. I've always believed that the right words, delivered at the right time, could build bridges, inspire change, and even move mountains. But I was about to learn that they could also be stolen, twisted, and used as weapons to shatter a career. This is the story of how my boss's ultimate betrayal became the unexpected catalyst for building my own empire, an empire founded on the very words he tried to claim as his own. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For 5 years, I was the silent partner to David Chen's success. As the head of corporate communications, David was the face of our department, the one who stood in the boardroom and presented our strategies with a confident smile. I was the engine humming quietly beneath the surface. My official title was senior speechwriter, but in reality, I was his ghost. I wrote the soaring speeches for our highest-profile clients, the crisis communications that saved multi-million-dollar deals, and the internal memos that rallied employees. David didn't just approve my work, he lived in it, breathed it, and presented it as his own. This arrangement, while uncredited, had its perks. The pay was excellent, the work was challenging, and I had a degree of creative autonomy that was rare in our industry. "Claire, you're the best I've ever seen," David would often say, his voice smooth as polished marble. "We're a team. Your brilliance, my delivery. We're unbeatable." I believed him. At 42, David was charismatic and politically savvy, a master of office dynamics. He had positioned himself as my mentor, someone who was grooming me for bigger things, always dangling the promise of a future promotion, a head of creative role he was supposedly carving out just for me. The project that would change everything was the keynote address for the annual Global Innovators Summit. Our client was Atherton Digital, a tech giant on the verge of launching a revolutionary piece of software. This wasn't just another speech, it was the unveiling of a technology that would redefine the industry. The CEO, a man named Elias Vance, was a notoriously difficult client, a perfectionist who had rejected every draft from every other firm he'd hired. Our agency was his last stop. David took the meeting oozing confidence. "Don't worry, Elias," he'd said, clapping him on the back. "My team and I will craft something legendary for you." His team was me. For 6 weeks, I poured every ounce of my being into that speech. I researched quantum computing, interviewed Atherton's engineers, and spent sleepless nights searching for the perfect narrative thread. I wanted to capture not just the technical brilliance of the product, but the human story behind it, the hope, the struggle, the sheer audacity of its creators. The final draft was more than a speech, it was a manifesto. It was powerful, evocative, and deeply personal. It was, without a doubt, the best work of my career. When I sent it to David, his response was a single, breathless phone call. "Claire, it's a masterpiece, it's poetry. Vance is going to be ecstatic." He was right. The client loved it. The feedback was glowing, with Vance himself calling to commend David on his unparalleled genius. David, of course, accepted the praise graciously, mentioning his star team in passing, but the message was clear. The victory was his. A week before the summit, Sarah Jenkins, a junior speechwriter I had been mentoring, stopped by my desk. At 28, she was ambitious and eager, always watching, always learning. "That Atherton speech is all anyone is talking about," she said, her eyes wide. "David is a legend. You must have learned so much working with him on that." I just smiled, a knot tightening in my stomach. We all contributed. I said vaguely, the culture of the firm was clear. David was the visionary, and the rest of us were his instruments. To claim otherwise would be career suicide. I told myself it didn't matter. The work was what was important, not the credit. But for the first time, that excuse felt hollow. I was the architect of a cathedral, and I wasn't even allowed to sign my name on the blueprint. The day of the Global Innovators Summit felt electric. The event was being live, streamed to millions, and the entire industry was watching. Our whole department gathered in the main conference room, the massive screen at the front showing the stage in crisp high definition. David was there, of course, having flown out for the event. He was seated in the front row, looking impeccably polished. Sarah sat beside me, practically vibrating with excitement. "This is it," she whispered. "This speech is going to win us so many awards." When Elias Vance walked on stage, a hush fell over our room. He adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to speak, my words, my cadence. My story, hearing them delivered with such power and conviction, sent a shiver down my spine. The audience was captivated. The camera panned across the faces in the crowd, CEO, investors, tech journalists, all of them hanging on every syllable. It was working. The long nights, the endless revisions, it had all been worth it. At the conclusion of the speech, the auditorium erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. Vance was beaming, waving to the crowd. Back in our office, people were cheering, hugging, and patting each other on the back. My colleagues turned to me, offering congratulations for my support on the project. Amazing work, Claire, one said. David's team really knocked it out of the park. Each compliment felt like a small paper cut. The real blow came moments later. The summit's host, a well-known journalist, returned to the stage to interview Vance. Elias, that was one of the most compelling speeches I have ever heard. She began, the narrative, the emotional depth. It was extraordinary who was the writer behind that masterpiece. A camera zoomed in on David's face in the front row. Vance smiled warmly and pointed directly at him. The credit for that goes entirely to one man, Vance announced, his voice booming through the speakers. The visionary wordsmith from our communications firm, Mr. David Chen. He flew in last week, and we locked ourselves in a room for 3 days, hammering it out. The man is a true genius. The air left my lungs. The cheering in our conference room became deafening, all directed at the screen, at the image of David, who was now standing up, basking in the applause and giving a humble, magnanimous wave. He had done more than just take credit for my work. He had fabricated an entire narrative, a lie that erased my existence from the project completely. He had stolen my story and replaced it with his own. Sarah glanced at me, a flicker of something, pity, confusion in her eyes before she turned back to the screen, clapping along with everyone else. I felt a profound sense of coldness spread through me. It wasn't just about the credit anymore. It was about the audacity of the lie. This wasn't a team leader taking the win. This was a thief celebrating his heist. In that moment, the mentor I had respected for 5 years vanished, replaced by a stranger. A fraud who had built his career on my voice. The pedestal I had placed him on crumbled into dust, and all I could feel was the silent, burning rage of betrayal. The following Monday, the office was buzzing. A framed poster of David, captioned Visionary, Leader, Wordsmith, had been hung in the main lobby. An all-staff email had gone out congratulating him on his singular achievement, with the Atherton speech. He walked through the office like a conquering hero, accepting handshakes and accolades. When he finally arrived at my desk, he was beaming. "We did it, Claire," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Can you believe that ovation? Vance is talking about putting us on a permanent retainer. This is huge for us. You told him you wrote it." I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion churning inside me. "You told him you and he wrote it together in a room." David's smile didn't falter. He chuckled as if I'd told a joke. "Oh, that's just how the game is played, you know that. Vance needed a story, a face to put to the genius. It's better for the firm, better for our image." He lowered his voice. "Don't worry, I know what you did, and you will be rewarded. That head of creative role is closer than ever." He winked, then moved on to the next cubicle, leaving me in the wake of his lie. His casual dismissal was more insulting than an outright denial. He didn't even have the decency to be ashamed. He expected me to be complicit, to swallow the injustice in exchange for a vague promise. That conversation was the spark. The betrayal at the summit had hurt, but his condescending justification ignited something else, resolve. This wasn't a one-time offense, it was a pattern. How many other masterpieces had he claimed? How much of his celebrated career was built on the silent work of others? My investigation began not with anger, but with a quiet, methodical search. I started with my own files. For every major project I'd completed, I had meticulous records, initial outlines, multiple drafts with time, stamped revisions, emailed chains with my feedback, and the final versions I'd sent to David. The Atherton speech alone had a digital footprint a mile long, a clear, undeniable history of its creation, all originating from my computer, my account. Next, I thought about past projects. There was the crisis comms plan for a pharmaceutical company 2 years ago that had won David an industry award. I pulled up the archives. There it was, my initial 30-page strategy document sent to David on a Sunday night. The final version he presented to the client was virtually identical, with only a few minor tweaks. Then there was the powerful rebranding campaign for a nonprofit. I found the original slogan, Hope in Action, in a brainstorming document I had created, a file David had never even opened. He had presented that slogan to the client as a stroke of late-night inspiration. The most damning discovery came from an unexpected source. I was searching the company's shared server for an old file when I stumbled upon a misfiled folder labeled DC Personal. My curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a subfolder named Awards Submissions. It contained drafts of his applications for various industry awards over the past 5 years. In each one, he had copied and pasted entire paragraphs from my works, speeches, strategy documents, even informal emails, and presented them as his own philosophy on communication. He was using my words to define his professional identity. The final piece of the puzzle was Sarah. I remembered the look in her eyes during the summit. She knew something. One afternoon, I caught her alone in the break room. I kept my tone casual. It's crazy how much work went into that Atherton speech, right? I was up until 3 a.m. most nights that last week. Sarah fidgeted with her coffee cup, refusing to meet my eyes. I know, she said quietly. I saw your draft timestamps David had me formatted. He said he was pulling an all-nighter, but the file he sent me to reformat at 4 a.m. was identical to the one you had saved at midnight. She finally looked at me, her expression a mixture of guilt and fear. He told me to keep it between us. He said it was a test of my loyalty. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was actively creating a conspiracy, pulling junior employees into his web of lies to protect himself. He had underestimated me. He saw me as a quiet, diligent worker bee, not as a strategist. He thought his charisma and authority made him untouchable, but every lie, every stolen phrase was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. And I was about to pull on every single one of them. With the evidence mounting, I knew a simple confrontation would be useless. David was a master manipulator. He would twist my accusations, paint me as a disgruntled employee, and use his authority to crush me. A direct attack was a fool's errand. I needed a different kind of plan, one that was silent, strategic, and undeniable. I needed an ally. That's when I thought of Richard Sterling. Richard was a legend in the PR world. He had founded one of the most respected boutique firms in the country before selling it for a fortune and settling into a semi-retired life of consulting and mentoring. I had met him once at an industry event where he'd given a talk on ethics in communication. He had spoken with a clarity and integrity that was rare in our business. I found his contact information and sent him a carefully worded email asking for advice on a complex authorship and intellectual property issue. To my surprise, he responded within an hour, inviting me for coffee. We met in a quiet cafe far from my office. I laid out the story, not with emotion, but with facts. I showed him the timestamps, the email chains, the award submissions, the side-by-side comparisons of my drafts and David's final products. I didn't present it as a complaint. I presented it as a case study. Richard listened intently, his expression growing more grim with each piece of evidence. When I finished, he leaned back and was silent for a long moment. "This isn't just plagiarism, Claire," he said, his voice low and serious. "This is a profound ethical breach. David Chen hasn't just stolen your work. He's committed fraud against his clients and his own company. He's selling a lie." He looked me in the eye. "What do you want to be the outcome here?" "I want to build something of my own," I said, the words surprising even myself with their certainty. "I don't want to destroy him. I want to make him irrelevant. I want to create a firm where talent is credited and integrity is the foundation." Richard's face broke into a smile for the first time. "That's the best answer you could have given." He then became all business, his decades of experience kicking in. He advised me against going to HR or our firm's leadership. "They will protect the company, not you," he warned, "and David is a major rainmaker. They'll bury this and you with it." Instead, he proposed a plan of quiet preparation. For the next 2 months, I led a double life. By day, I was the diligent speechwriter, delivering my work to David on time and without complaint. I gave him no reason to suspect anything was amiss, but by night, I was an entrepreneur in stealth mode. Guided by Richard, I began laying the groundwork for my own communications consultancy. I legally registered a business name, Veritas Communications, Latin for truth. Richard introduced me to a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property and a web developer who began building a sleek, professional website. The most crucial part of the plan was building my portfolio. My name was unknown in the industry. I needed to prove my talent was my own. Richard, acting as a quiet advocate, began to work his magic. He had connections everywhere. He started by introducing me under a strict non-disclosure agreement to the head of a major foundation who needed a gala speech. I have a brilliant writer, a protege. He'd tell them, she's the real deal. I took the freelance work, writing on weekends and late at night. I poured my soul into it. My first project was a resounding success. The client was thrilled. Word of mouth, carefully cultivated by Richard, began to spread through his exclusive network. I took on another project, then another. A tech startup, a nonprofit, a university president. For each one, I received glowing testimonials, all addressed to me, Claire, the brilliant wordsmith from Veritas Communications. I was methodically, quietly building a body of proof, a portfolio of excellence tied directly and irrevocably to my name. All the while, David remained oblivious, convinced I was still his loyal, silent ghostwriter, busy crafting the words that would continue to fuel his ascent. He had no idea I was no longer building his pedestal. I was building my own launchpad. The stage was almost set. I had a registered company, a growing portfolio of successful freelance projects, and a powerful mentor in Richard. But the final piece of the plan was the most delicate. I needed to reclaim the work David had stolen, specifically the Atherton speech. It was my magnum opus, and I couldn't let him own it. This required a move of surgical precision. My opportunity came in the form of an industry publication, Communication Quarterly, the most prestigious journal in our field. They were doing a special edition on the art of the narrative, and they had announced an open call for case studies on groundbreaking speeches from the past year. The Atherton speech was, of course, a prime candidate. I knew David would submit. His ego wouldn't allow him not to. My plan was not to expose him to the magazine, but to create a counter-narrative that would be so compelling, so authentic, that his version would look like a cheap imitation. I began to write my own case study. I didn't just analyze the final speech, I detailed its entire genesis. I wrote about the initial creative brief, the interviews with the engineers, the philosophical concept of digital humanism that I had developed as its core theme. I included excerpts from my early drafts, showing the evolution of key phrases and metaphors. I described my creative process, my late night breakthroughs, the very heart and soul I had poured into the project. My submission was an intimate, detailed account of creation, filled with specifics that only the true author could know. It was over 5,000 words long, supported by a wealth of evidence. The final touch was the cover letter. In it, I introduced myself as the senior speechwriter on the project and the founder of Veritas Communications. I explained that while the speech was delivered on behalf of my former firm, I was now stepping out on my own and wanted to share the deep strategic and creative thinking that went into such a successful piece of communication. I was not accusing David of anything. I was simply and confidently claiming my own work. I submitted my case study. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the editor of Communication Quarterly. She was blown away. She called my submission one of the most insightful and thorough analyses of the speechwriting process she had ever read. She wanted to feature it as the centerpiece of the special edition. Then she added a curious line. We also received a submission from a Mr. David Chen on the same speech. His was less detailed, more of a high-level overview. We would, of course, prefer to publish your far more substantive piece. My heart hammered in my chest. It was working. David, in his arrogance, had likely dashed off a few pages of broad, self-congratulatory nonsense, assuming his name and title were enough. He had no access to the drafts, no knowledge of the real creative journey. He could describe the finished house, but I could explain how every brick was laid. Now it was time to orchestrate the timing. The special edition of Communication Quarterly was set to be published online on a Friday. The annual Communications Guild Awards ceremony, the most important event of our industry's calendar, was that same evening. I already knew, through office gossip, that David had submitted the Atherton speech for the Speech of the Year award. He was confident he would win. The day before the publication, I resigned. I walked into David's office, placed my letter on his desk, and kept it brief. David, I'm leaving to start my own consultancy. He looked stunned, then amused. Your own consultancy, Claire, be serious. You're a great writer, but you're not a rainmaker. You need me? I don't think I do, I said calmly. This is a mistake. he said, his tone shifting, becoming darker. The industry is small. You'll find it's very cold out there without the firm's name behind you. I'll take my chances, I replied, turned, and walked out, leaving him standing there, utterly clueless about the storm that was about to break. He thought he was losing a subordinate. He had no idea he was about to be checkmated. The evening of the Communications Guild Awards was thick with anticipation. I wasn't there. Instead, I was at Richard's office, a war room of two, with laptops open and phones ready. At 5:00 p.m., sharp, exactly 2 hours before the awards dinner began, Communication Quarterly Special Edition went live. My case study, Genesis of a Manifesto, the Making of the Atherton Speech, was the lead article. Simultaneously, my new website for Veritas Communications launched. The homepage was a clean, elegant design featuring a single, bold statement, the architect behind the words. Below it were links to my portfolio, including the now published case study and the glowing testimonials from my freelance clients. I sent the link to a handful of influential industry bloggers and journalists that Richard had primed, letting them know about the fascinating inside story. Behind the year's most famous speech, the first ripple started 30 minutes later. A prominent industry blogger tweeted, "Incredible piece by at Claire Veritas in CQ, a masterclass in speechwriting. Raises some serious questions about the official narrative on the Atherton speech." The tweet included a link to my article. The ripples quickly became a wave. My phone started vibrating with notifications. My article was being shared across LinkedIn, with commentators noting the striking difference between my detailed account and the vague story David had been telling. People were connecting the dots. The visionary wordsmith was being exposed as a hollow frontman. Meanwhile, David was at the awards ceremony, completely unaware. He was schmoozing, accepting premature congratulations, soaking in the admiration. The Speech of the Year category was one of the last to be announced. By the time it came up, the digital world of our industry was already on fire. Phones were lighting up under the tables in the banquet hall as attendees started seeing the tweets and LinkedIn posts. The presenter walked to the podium, and now, for the award for Speech of the Year, the nominees are... A list of names and projects flashed on the screen, and then the winner was announced. The award goes to the Atherton Digital Keynote Address submitted by David Chen. A camera found David's face. He was smiling, already rising from his seat, but the applause was hesitant, scattered. People were looking at their phones, then at each other, whispering. Something was wrong. As David walked toward the stage, my final move was deployed. Richard, using his extensive contact list, had sent a targeted email to every major CEO, communications head, and journalist in attendance. The subject line was simple, a matter of authorship. The email contained a brief, professional note from Richard Sterling himself, endorsing my work and linking to both my article in Communication Quarterly and the Veritas Communications website. David reached the stage, accepted the heavy glass trophy, and stepped up to the microphone. He opened his mouth to speak, but by now the whispers in the room had grown to a low, steady buzz. His smile faltered. He could feel the mood in the room had shifted. It was no longer adulation, it was suspicion. His moment of ultimate triumph had been poisoned at its source. He gave a short, fumbled acceptance speech and practically fled the stage. He didn't know it yet, but his career was over, not with a bang, but with 1,000 quiet clicks and shares. I hadn't shouted his guilt from the rooftops. I had simply and elegantly told the truth, supported by a symphony of undeniable evidence. I had let his own lies and my own quiet competence do the work. He had built his brand on my words, and with my words I had dismantled it. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for David. By Monday morning, the story was the only thing anyone in our industry was talking about. Clients of my former firm, including Atherton Digital, began asking pointed questions. An internal investigation was launched, but it was a mere formality. My case study was the smoking gun, and David had no defense. Within a week, he was quietly fired. His name, once a symbol of success, became a cautionary tale about ego and deceit. For me, the opposite happened. My inbox was flooded. I received emails from CEO who admired my strategy, from young writers who were inspired by my story, and most importantly, from prospective clients who wanted to hire the real deal. Veritas Communications had more leads in its first week than I had dreamed of having in its first year. Sarah Jenkins, my former colleague, was one of the first to reach out. She sent a long, apologetic email and asked if there might be a place for her at my new firm. I hired her. She had made a mistake under pressure, but I believed in second chances, and I needed talented people I could trust to build my team. My first major client was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of a rival tech firm to Atherton. He had read my article and was impressed not just by my writing, but by my courage. Anyone who can orchestrate a counter move that precise, he told me during our first meeting, is someone I want managing my company's narrative. Over the next 2 years, Veritas Communications grew beyond my wildest expectations. We became the go-to firm for authentic, powerful storytelling. Our brand was built on the very principle David had ignored: integrity. We credited our writers, we collaborated transparently with our clients, and we produced work that was not only effective but also true. I was no longer a ghostwriter hiding in the shadows. I was the founder and CEO of a thriving empire, an empire built not on revenge, but on the unwavering belief that in the end, the truth is the most powerful story of all. I never saw David again, but I heard he left the city, unable to find work in the industry he had once dominated. Sometimes, I think about the man who stole my work and inadvertently handed me my destiny. His betrayal was a catalyst, a painful but necessary fire that burned away my deference and forced me to claim my own power. He set out to build his kingdom on a foundation of my words, but in the end, the only empire that stood was the one I built myself, brick by honest brick.